I want to talk about the origins of Sunnism and the split between Sunnis and Shias. And I think I want to start off with two general points. Well, the first is that the divisions within the Muslim community begin immediately after the death of Prophet Muhammad and presumably reflect latent difficulties. Anyway, and one of the points I want to make in this short discussion is that the different issues that emerge are about serious differences about how the Muslim community is going to be governed. They're not sort of frivolous quarrels about unimportant things. It may seem when you read some of the books, why, how can anybody be interested in this? Why should this be so important? But they are. And they're part of a working out process because Prophet Muhammad died according to the Sunnis, at least, without making a clear provision for his succession. Shias, at least some Shias, claim that he did, but actually this truth was suppressed by the Sunnis and so on. So right from the beginning, you're getting these things. The second is that it's often described as the Shias are heretics or the Sunnis are heretics, but more often the Shias are heretics. And we have to look a bit about what heresy means in Islam. What are the issues? Now, heresy in early Christianity is concerned with theological matters largely, theological matters about the incarnation, the relationships of members of the Trinity, and so on. Heresy in the early Islamic community is mostly about authority within the community. The big question is who should lead the Muslim community, and the question that goes on from that is who should decide disputed and problematic questions about Islamic law? About people who ask the question, how do I be a good Muslim? What does a good Muslim do in these circumstances? You need to have an authority. Quran provides guidelines for sure, but it's not a law book. And there are all sorts of decisions that have to be made. So who do you look to within the community for this sort of authority? And the third point, perhaps I said I'd start off with 2 points, and I've gone on to the third, is that the evolution of the difference between Sunnis and Shias takes 300 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad. And so I'm going to use the phrase proto-Sunnis and proto-Shias because these ideas are swirling around, people are adopting them and taking them up and so on. But it's not until around the year 950 that the sectarian boundaries, as we see them today and have seen them ever since, become defined and so on. The long process of negotiation, and a lot of the historiography, a lot of discussion rather neglects this and imagines that the day when Prophet Muhammad was alive and dead were all these points of view were well articulated and worked out. That is not the case. So there are fundamentally two different points of view about this, or two different options that emerge. The first of these is that the new leader of the community should be chosen by the senior members of the community, those people who are known in the Muslim tradition as the companions of the Prophet. And the companions of the Prophet eventually become numbered in thousands, but there are about half a dozen key figures there. And this, obviously, what you do when the Prophet when the Prophet dies, or why then you choose the wisest people, the people who've known Prophet Muhammad since the early days of his struggle in Mecca, and so on and so forth. So that's one way of progressing on this. The other is to look for the family of the Prophet. And the family of the Prophet is a key concept in the ideas of Shiism. The family of the Prophet, Ahl al Bayt, in the Arabic, the family of the Prophet are, well, obviously the Prophet himself, but his daughter Fāṭima. The Prophet Muhammad had a lot of children, only one of whom survived to adulthood, and that was his daughter Fāṭima. And Fāṭima, in the best of traditional Arabian way, had married her cousin, ʿAlī. And ʿAlī and Fāṭima are the nucleus of the family of the Prophet, and that they ʿAlī had a number of children, but ʿAlī and Fāṭima together just had two children. one of whom was called Ḥasan, and the other of whom was called Ḥusayn. So people who believed that if you wanted to choose a new leader, you looked to the hereditary principle, you looked to the family of the Prophet, would pay attention to Ali and then to Ḥasan and Ḥusayn. Now, this difference of opinion is not just about the mechanism of choosing different mechanisms of choosing a leader. It has profound implications in the developing argument and discussion. And this was simply that if you rely on hereditary succession, through Ali and Fāṭima and their children and descendants and so on, then the implication is that these people are chosen by God. That's the way God makes the choice of who should lead the community, is by hereditary succession. And therefore, people went on to argue that the family of the Prophet have a unique status as, possibly you could argue, intermediaries between mankind and God, but that's theologically a bit dubious. So basically the issue is they, by virtue of their hereditary, by virtue of the fact that this family is the family that's chosen by God, they're the people you can rely on for making decisions about these crucial questions of Muslim law and conduct. So it's not just about constitutional arrangements for the choosing of the successor, and these different ways are worked out or experimented with. Early Islamic politics are very experimental. Nothing like this had been tried before. There was no point in looking and saying, what did Abraham do or something like that, because though Abraham is a very esteemed figure, it's all very old. There's no point in looking and saying, how did the Romans do it or how did the Persians do it, because that's irrelevant, because God has created this new dispensation, given humanity this new dispensation. So we have to work within the terms of the divine inspiration there. The first caliph, Abu Bakr, was the first caliph, 632 to 634, was essentially, as far as the traditional accounts are concerned at least, was essentially chosen by a sort of coup d'etat, basically. He was the man on the scene and so on. But the key moment happens when his successor, Umar ibn al-Khattab, was assassinated in 644, and the companions of the Prophet, the surviving companions of the Prophet, created a committee. And the committee was called a Shūrā, and the committee chose one of their number, Uthmān ibn Affan, to be the next caliph, And then when he died in 656, he was murdered in 656, then it was Ali's turn. He was younger than the old people who had been in charge. It was Ali's turn to have a shot at the top office. And so there are all these various precedents that can be looked at. And that gives rise to Ali's career, gives rise to the first big trauma of Islamic history, which is a dispute between Ali and Muʿāwiya, the Umayyad, who was the leader of the he was the leader of the Umayyad family, and he was Uthmān, the murdered Uthmān's closest relative. So he has the right to. And so the Muslim community was divided into ideas about authority. But of course, whenever you get discussions about the rights and wrongs of hereditary and so on, you're talking about a lot of other social issues as well. And one of the social issues is simply geographical. That in the confused fighting, which we don't need to go into now, between Ali and Muawiyah, Ali was supported by the Muslims of Iraq. Non-Muslims didn't play any part in this. But Ali was supported by the people of Iraq, and Muawiyah was supported by the people of Syria. And so it acquires this constitutional, if you like, argument, acquires a regional basis to it. And over the centuries too, particularly in Iraq, it became the case that Ali and his family and descendants attracted the allegiance of, as it were, the have-nots in the community, the disadvantaged, those people who felt that they were Muslims but they weren't equal. to the dominant elite. So it acquires a social and a regional following for the descendants of Ali. Then a number of attempts were made by descendants of Ali to assert their power and claim their rights and so on. They all failed. In 750, the Abbasid dynasty, who were sort of members of the family of the Prophet, they were like cousins. Well, they were cousins. But some people could say the Abbasids were members of the family of the Prophet, and therefore anyone who supported that should support them. But there were others who said, no, they're not. It's only the descendants of Ali and Fāṭima. So immediately, the question of who is family of the Prophet begets a whole lot more questions. You might imagine that hereditary succession of the primogeniture of the oldest and so on is a mechanism for solving succession disputes. But all experience of Western European history, where this became the norm from about the 12th century onwards, show that this is not the case. And so different people have different ideas about who should be the representative of the family of the Prophet. And around these figures, they gather different points of view. The first one, and I'm not going to go into all the sort of 99 sects and so on that the academics love to talk about, and so, but one of the people is Zayd ibn Ali, who is grandson of the Prophet, who led a rebellion against the Umayyads in 740 and was killed in the city of Kufa. End of, except that it wasn't the end of, because Zayd's followers decided that his children, who may or may not have been real people, were the true leaders of the community. Why? Because they had stood up against the forces of oppression. Other people had sat at home and said how bad things were. It was Zayd and his family and so on who had stood up, taken military action against them. And Zaydīs are still a big force in Yemen, and the majority of the people from North Yemen, the Houthis and so on, Zaydīs. And then there are the Ismāʿīlīs. Ismail's succession is an interesting one because it brings up a major discussion point. Ismail is said to have died before his father. So what is God telling us if he lets the hereditary heir die before his father? And all sorts of things. People said Ismail was unworthy of it and so on and so forth. But you can understand the reasons for the argument there. But and the Ismāʿīlīs, of course, are still not a political power so much as a major force in the Muslim community in all sorts of areas down to the present day. But the people who we call Imāmi Shi'is, we call Twelvers, which is the dominant Shi'i viewpoint in Iran and also in Iraq, amongst Iraq. They believe that there were 12 imams, that's leaders of the community. Caliph, imam is used in the Shia as roughly the meaning of the same sort of thing. And that the last of them disappeared in about 820 and 830. And some people said he left sons, some people said he didn't, but from there develops the fundamental concept in mainstream Shiism, if you like, of the hidden imam. The imam didn't die, he disappeared. He still exists sometime in the world. Without him, there could not be any true Islam. The problem is that we don't know where he is, and nobody recognizes him. Nobody can talk directly to him. Now, this, from the point of view of theologians and religious figures, this is immensely convenient. Because having a real live imam leads to all sorts of problems. I mean, if they misbehave or they're failures or one sort or another, have a hidden imam who nobody can communicate with, and so it's just a perfect solution. And so we have the doctrine of the hidden imam, which animates and gives the authority to the people like the religious figures like the Ayatollahs in Iran. Ayatollah is quite a modern title, but the religious leaders, because they claim that they are capable of interpreting what the hidden imam would be saying if he said anything, which he doesn't, if you see what I mean. And it's a sort of a proxy arrangement there, which leads to the final point I'm going to make, because the bell has already rung. The final point I want to make is how this reflects on the whole business of revival of the caliphate and revival of the ISIS caliphate, and so on. What we're hearing about, this may persuade some Sunnis, it can't persuade the Shia. Why? Because there is no vacancy for the caliphate, because the hidden Imam is there. And so you can't choose anybody or any other Muslim to do this. And as a result of that, I think attempts to have, as it were, a new universal caliphate are simply going to founder on this fundamental difference. So I could go on, as you can probably realise, for ages and ages and ages about this. But the dispute between Sunnis and Shias is about fundamental issues of the government and leadership of the Muslim community. And it's a debate that will go on and on and on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
I have to ask you one thing. Has there ever been somebody coming forward claiming to be the hidden Imam?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but there's nobody who has really made that work. I mean, they've been generally dismissed as nutters, I think, if I want to like a word. But no, nobody has made a substantial and effective claim to be the hidden Imam. It's too convenient to keep him hidden.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.